good. Okay. Well, thank you. Can everybody hear? Okay, well, I have to say hello, Idaho. Right? I am in Idaho, right? This is Idaho because I travel around the world. I've just recently been in Oman, Jordan, Bahrain, Vietnam, South Africa, Brazil, all over the world. And I was flying here from Oregon and I realized I've never been to Idaho. So I am so excited to be here in Idaho, and it is very beautiful, and I think it could be the most friendliest place on the planet. So thank you, Idaho. So I wanted to also really thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here to be your speaker. And as you can see, that what I'm going to be talking about is joyful leadership. And what happened is I started preparing to speak about this joyful leadership, and I started stressing out. And I thought, well, that's silly. I can't be stressing out. I'm supposed to be talking about joyful leadership. So instead of worrying about it, what I really decided is I wanted to share with you my roller coaster ride of life. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey of leadership. So what is joyful leadership? I think joyful leadership is the ability to think outside the box. It's about trusting your imagination and your creative self. And it's about boldly experiencing what life has to offer. So it's also about celebrating your successes, the big successes and the small hurdles. And it's about gratitude. It's about being thankful for being alive, because I really think that all of us who are here on this earth, our time is brief and we have to use the most of it. But it's also about having the strength and the determination, and what I would say also having the chutzpah to go after your dreams, not only for yourself, but for the millions of girls and women globally whose path you are forging, so they can reach their highest potential. So how did I get this joyful attitude? Well, for that, I have to go back and think about my parents. May their memory be for a blessing. My father was born in the border of Poland and Russia. And when he was 13 years old, unfortunately, his entire family was killed because of the Holocaust. And my father self-taught himself 9 languages, though he never finished high school. My mom was from the border of Austria. She was a world-famous figure skater. She was 3rd European world champion. And one day she was skating for Vienna, for Austria, as a pre-Olympic skater. The next day, she was thrown out of the country. She also narrowly escaped the Holocaust. But my parents were some of the most joyful people I have ever known. My parents never let me miss the beauty of a sunset, and they also let me have chocolate cake every day for breakfast, if that's what I wanted. They filled me with love and with confidence. And let me give you an example. When I was in 4th grade, I was not that good in math, and I came home. I had gotten a 0 on the math test. And I came home and I sort of sheepishly told my mom, I said, "Mom, look, I got a 0 on my math test." And my mom said, without missing a beat, "Well, I guess the teacher isn't very good." And I thought, that is a great way to teach someone how to believe in yourself and that you can be imperfect but perfect at the same time. So I was a happy youngster, very athletic. I grew up non-disabled, an able-bodied person in New York. Are there any New Yorkers here? All right, New York. You probably have figured out that I'm already from New York. So I'm growing up in New York, and it's August 29th, 1971. So August 29th, 1971. Is this the worst day of my life? Or is it a day in my life that made me who I am and the woman who's speaking to you today, who's had the honor to be a leader and hopefully who has changed the lives of thousands of people with disabilities globally? So let me tell you my story. I'm 18 years old and I'm studying at the University of Colorado in Boulder. It's Sunday night. Monday, I am trying out for the women's basketball team. And like my athletic mom, I'm very athletic, and I'm very excited to make that team. I was also studying therapeutic recreation. I thought it'd be interesting to work and help with disabled people. I didn't know any disabled people at the time. I was just taking the classes. I'm a passenger in a car coming down the Rocky Mountains. I had met my then boyfriend, and as soon as I got into the car, I realized he had been to a party without me before that, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He's driving down the mountain. The car is going very fast. I tell him to slow down. He doesn't listen. The car goes at 60 miles an hour into the Rocky Mountains. And I knew at that second that my life was changed forever. So now who was I? I'm a woman. I'm in a wheelchair. I'm suddenly a second-class citizen. I can't get on the bus. I can't use the subways. And no one is hiring me for a job. So you may think that I got really depressed. But no, I was not depressed. But I was frustrated. I was angry. I was angry about the discrimination that I was facing, and I realized that there are no role models for me in this new body as a woman in the wheelchair, atrophied legs, weakened bladder. I am now paraplegic, and I spend 11 months in a rehab center, and eventually I go out to University of California at Berkeley to continue my studies. And suddenly I started questioning everything about being disabled. So why is it every time they talk about people with disabilities, it's in medical terms? So if you all go swimming, it's swimming, right? I go swimming, it's therapeutic swimming. And I'm thinking, why? I'm getting wet, same as you, same idea. So while I was a student, I decided I would design a recreation program by and for people with disabilities to do the things that I used to do: gymnastics, dancing, going camping at Yosemite. But I was just taking a class at the university. But my professor, so remember to tell your professors this, my professor said, well, don't just write this as a paper. Why don't you really start a recreation program? So I wrote a grant with a friend of mine, and it got funded. And I started an organization called the Berkeley Outreach Recreation Program, which is a nationally recognized recreation program for people with disabilities, and it just celebrated its 40th year. So one of the stories I want to share with you is that I always liked horses. So, okay, I'm in Idaho. How many of you have horses? Oh my God, a lot of you. How many of you like horses? Okay, even more of you. So I decided I wanted to have horseback riding for people with disabilities. So we didn't want a special place. We built a regular ramp in a regular stable. We trained some horses, and we designed a saddle so that even quadriplegics could go riding. It had some straps, a higher back, and the horses were all very much trained for voice commands, so they were very calm horses. And while I was directing this recreation program, I had a chance to speak at some national conference, and I told them about our horseback riding program. And someone said, Susan, are you kidding? You're putting disabled people, quadriplegics, on horses? Isn't that dangerous? Can't they get in trouble? Can't they pull off the horse? And I said, you know, we got a lot of safety guards. And I said, you know, I've asked the disabled people who are in our riding program about what they think about the riding program. And I asked some of the people who are quadriplegics, and you know what they told me? They said, Susan, we think every quadriplegic has the right to break their neck twice. Because I think part of life is taking risks. And part of joyful leadership is not only taking risks, but also taking leadership positions. And sometimes it means taking leadership positions even if you have no experience, even if you learn as you go, even if you need to trust yourself and surround yourself with others who not only believe in your dreams, but who also can complement you and give you the skills that you might have so that you can accomplish your goals. So I did this, and I ran this recreation program. I was the co-director with a friend of mine. And suddenly, I'm at Berkeley, and I read the newspaper, and there's an ad, and it says, be an ambassador of goodwill, all expenses paid. Who would answer that ad? Right? Okay. So I did, and I got a Rotary scholarship. And I was one of 3 students. I went to the University of Queensland in Australia. I was one of 3 disabled students at the whole university, the only international student with a disability. And I had a fabulous year, and I did what everybody did then. I had a break for 6 weeks, and I thought, well, what should I do? And I thought, I'll do what everybody else seems to be doing. I'll hitchhike through New Zealand. So I hitchhiked in my wheelchair for 6 weeks through New Zealand. But I decided to ask a friend of mine from the U.S. to join me, and he did. He also happened to be in a wheelchair. So we had 2 people in wheelchairs for 6 weeks. We hitchhiked through New Zealand. We had no problems. We stayed with families along the way, because it never occurred to me that a person in a wheelchair wouldn't hitchhike through New Zealand. And I'm still in contact with a lot of the families that I met that day. But I kept having this question. I studied abroad, and I thought, so where are all the other disabled people? Why don't they know that this amazing experience to study abroad is possible? And during that year, I climbed Ayers Rock, which is now called Uluru Rock, and I did that on my bum, as they say in Australia. And I camped throughout Australia, had amazing experiences, but I still did not know where people with disabilities were. And I thought, you really need to know about international exchange if you want to be a global leader. How many of you here have ever studied abroad? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people. How many of you have traveled abroad? Almost everybody. So you know how important that is. So I finished my year in Australia, and then I thought I want one more adventure. So I went with a friend, and we didn't exactly know what we were doing. We decided we were going to take local buses through Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Sounded good, right? So we took all these buses through all these small villages. And while I was in Thailand, I was in a very small village, and I was going through this marketplace, and there on the corner I saw a small boy. He was begging. He was on the floor. He probably had cerebral palsy. I could tell by his clenched hands. And suddenly, his eyes and my eyes, they just caught each other. And I'm sure he was so surprised to see this person with a fancy wheelchair in his small village. And we looked at each other, and it's like everything else just stood still. And I had one thought. And that thought was family. He is my family. He is a person with disability. We are probably from very different places, very different economic conditions, but we both have faced discrimination. We both probably are facing preconceived notions of what is possible, and I knew that somehow I was connected to him and his experience. And I have never forgotten that moment. And so when I finished my studies, I went out to the University of Oregon, where I was then completing my master's degree. And there I co-founded another organization called Mobility International USA, because I believe that people with disabilities and their allies are part of a global family. And we needed to organize these leadership exchange programs so that people with disabilities from around the world could come to the United States and have a chance to learn about disability rights and policy. Because many people around the world don't know that a person in a wheelchair can use a public bus that has a lift, or that disabled children can be in the regular school, or that there can be sign language interpreters at the university, that there can be materials in Braille and alternate format, that we have a law like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was started because of disabled people's activism. And even though there are laws around the world for disabled people, almost none of those laws around the world are enforced. And because we wanted the disabled people and their allies from around the world to see this, because sometimes you can't dream what is possible if you've never experienced it. And when somebody comes in a wheelchair and rides a public bus for the first time, then they are really experience it. But as leaders, you have to do something else. You have to dream of ideas, of programs, or of businesses, sometimes even before you have experienced them. So creating a new organization, that's where imagination and that's where creativity comes in. So once one started as a dream, a program, now Mobility International, the organization that I'm the CEO of, we have had over 2,300 people go on our exchanges, as my wonderful Cherie mentioned, from over 135 countries. And actually, and our organization, called MyUSA for short, just celebrated its 35 years. And I was thinking, if the other organization celebrated 40 years, and does that make me like 80 or something? Not that there's anything wrong with being 80. So, but it was really amazing to have this organization now have so many years. But then I realized that exchanges were not just enough. That I wanted people with disabilities not only to come to the United States, and people from the United States go to travel in other countries to learn about disability rights, but disabled people have to be in all the existing exchange programs. So I wanted to be sure that every girl, young disabled girl in a wheelchair, could grow up imagining studying Spanish in Spain, or a deaf person could be a Fulbright scholar, or someone with a learning disability could volunteer in Africa, side by side with non-disabled people. And so we give people information on how they can do that. And if any of you audience are interested in that or know someone, and there's no age limit, we have information. There's some information on your tables about the organization and how you can contact us. But this was still not enough. I still had another idea. And that is that even though we were working with disabled men and women, I realized we needed to do something specifically for women and girls with disabilities. Because disabled women and girls have more discrimination and harder obstacles than disabled men. So I needed to create a program with my fabulous staff, something innovative, something to create an environment where disabled women could reach their highest potential instead of being the poorest of the poor. And so we organized 350 women with disabilities from all over the world to come to the Beijing conference in China. Does anyone here go to the 1995 conference on women in Beijing, China? Raise your hand. Okay, only a few of you. Was anyone born in 1995? All right, close enough. Well, at the Beijing conference in China, that is where Hillary Clinton opened up the conference, and that's where she said women's rights are human rights. And I gave the opening remarks at our conference for disabled women, which was held one day before this big women's conference. And guess what day it was? August 29th. It was the anniversary of my car accident. And I said, when I was talking to all these women from all over the world, I said, I celebrate that day. Because that's the day that something, yes, at that time, something devastating happened, but I turned it around, and today, August 29th, is a day of celebration. Because I am proud to belong to the tribe of other women and other women with disabilities who are brilliant, who are resilient, who are fighting for a world where every girl with a disability can have her rights, and they can trampoline to their highest potential. And so when women with disabilities at this conference said, we said, what do you want? What do you need to do to take the next steps to make things happen? They said, we want to have a training program for us where we can come from all over the world and learn how we can work against discrimination and get laws enforced. And so we called this program WILD, the Women's Institute on Leadership and Disability. And women come, and women learn. Should I tell you the really bad joke? Someone said, why don't you have a conference for women, for men at the same name? What would it be called? Mild. So, but that's not to say that we couldn't do that, but we had been working for men for so long, but we hadn't done a program specifically for women. So what happens when these women come to this WILD program? They learn about how to prevent violence, because violence is a big source of injury for so many disabled women. But we don't talk about self-defense, we do it. How to use your wheelchair as your weapon, your canes. We learn how to use the media to portray positive images of disabled women, how to access health care. because many deaf women didn't even know how you get HIV/AIDS, because where they were having courses about AIDS prevention, there were no sign language interpreters. Or blind women in Fiji were not getting mammograms because no one thought that blind women can get breast cancer and needed to get screenings. So these were some terrible things were happening, but these women were going to make some changes. And there's some terrifying statistics that less than 1% of disabled women girls in developing countries are literate. Less than 1%. That is terrible. And there's less chance of a disabled woman getting an education than a disabled man. Less chance of getting health care, less chance of getting married, which in many countries is also very important to getting economic stability and getting land rights. And as I said, there's more chance of violence. So sometimes these women at these conferences, but Susan, there's so much, it's so hard for us. We have two things against us. We're women and we're disabled. And I said, yes, that's true. You're women and you're disabled, but you have two positive things going for you. One, you are women. You are strong and you are powerful. And two, you are disabled women and you are from a tribe of women. Then we have our own culture and our own experience, and this should be a source of pride for you. You have two positive things going before you. And so we have a photo exhibit that's going around the world, and it's called Brilliant and Resilient, the Power of Disabled Women Activists. And that's what we're trying to instill in women. So we also do some things besides these courses. The women go river rafting. They go on a challenge course up 40 feet in the air and swing across trees. Because sometimes people don't even know that they have what we call internalized oppression. That sometimes women with disabilities and women don't even know what you can do because our self-concept is too low. So the challenge course is sort of a metaphor of challenging your fear and looking at your own ideas, like maybe I can do more than I think I can. So you have higher expectations of what you can do. And then also a challenge course that was helping women learn about external discrimination, that sometimes people have preconceived notions of what you can do, which are way too low. So as one of my wild sisters said, don't try to live up to society's expectations. They're much too low. And I think that's true. So like this conference, we are trying to create an environment of women, and in this conference it's also good to have men, because we need men and women to make changes in the world. But we want the WILD program to make sure that each woman reaches their highest potential. So what's the mantra? What's the call for the WILD program? Our mantra or our calling is, we are loud, we are proud, and we are passionate. Can you say that with me? We are loud, proud, and we are passionate. Just say loud, proud, and passionate one more time. We are loud, proud, and passionate. Right. And I think that is perhaps a way to sum up what it means to be a joyful leader, to have a vision of what you want to change in the world, or what goal you might have for yourself so that you stay positive despite sometimes the overwhelming obstacles that you can face as a leader. And perhaps what's most important is, how do you do that and how do you enjoy the journey while you're doing it? So we have trained over 240 women from over 83 countries. We have a training manual in 3 languages, and each of the women get a small grant, and then they go back to their countries and they do WILD programs. So we are creating an army of wild women all around the world. I'm going to drink to that. And one of the things that I just want to share with you too is, you know, a lot of times with people with disabilities, we talk a lot about inclusion, right? And I think inclusion is good, but I think inclusion is taking too long. I want to see these things happen in my lifetime. So I am telling these women to move from inclusion to infiltration. So what does that mean? I am telling the disabled women, When you're in your other countries and you see a health clinic and it doesn't have a ramp or it doesn't have an interpreter, you need to take your other disabled women, your wild sisters, and go and show up to that clinic. If you see a university and disabled people, men and women and boys, aren't in that university, you need to go and talk to the university president and say disabled people have to be at the university. Because women with disabilities and men with disabilities, you have a right to all these programs and you have a right to be there. So now we have wild women and people with disabilities from all over the world joyfully infiltrating these programs because they know they have a right to be there. Or as one wild sister said from El Salvador, "Oh, Susan, I think I know what infiltration means. Infiltration means going to the party even if you're not invited." So I want to tell you a little bit more, and I want to get a little bit personal, which wasn't easy when you're talking to 800 people. But I wanted to say that sometimes these journeys are not always easy. And even though I was surrounded by many wonderful people, I have a fabulous staff, like all of you in this room, all of us have had obstacles on our journeys to be leaders. So in 1995, my parents moved to New York, to Oregon, to be with me. And my dad died suddenly, and I was sharing my tears with you, sitting at the table next to you. And I was devastated when my dad died. And then my mom, my world-famous ice skating mom, got Alzheimer's. And even though I travel a lot for my job, I stopped traveling for 7 years. And even though I worked full-time, I stayed home and I took care of my mom with my partner in my home. And eventually, with my mom's Alzheimer's, we were both in wheelchairs. And we were dancing sometimes in the living room, even though at the end my mom could no longer speak. And I'm going to cry like you did. And my mom died holding my hand in the living room after living with her for 7 years. And she just died quietly in the between breaths while we were just talking with some friends. And of all the awards, and of all the accomplishments, that I've been given, I am most proud of the time that I spent with her, because that was a way for me to thank my parents and to honor my parents, and to give me this joyful attitude. So I want to just share with you that it's important to be steadfast in your dreams and to find joy whenever possible. Because sometimes I think, for me at least, when I think about what is the meaning of life, for me I think the meaning of life is that it ends. And so what is left is our ability to use each moment and each opportunity to the fullest. So as we ride with this roller coaster of life, I think it's really important that we support each other. Those we know and love, those we meet in conferences like this. You should probably look around at all the people at your table who you're going to be with the next few days. Because sometimes we can affect people in ways that we don't even know is happening at the time we talk with them. So I want to leave you with a few insights. I think it's important that each of you think about what you want to do in your life and what dreams that you have. And I think it's each important to also think how you will be creative, how you will imagine what is possible, how you will trust in your ability to forge ahead even if you don't know all the answers, to be resilient, because we here have an obligation. We know that as women, we have an obligation to use our talents, our insights, and our compassion to be leaders, to pave the way not only for ourselves, but for the millions of women and girls globally, with and without disabilities, so we can have a better world for all women. And if we have a better world for all women, we'll have a better world for boys and men, because we need everybody to transform this world. So August 29th, was it the best day of my life? Was it the worst day of my life? Or was it the beginning of an alternative path that if I could find the strength and purpose and joy of my journey, that I would have this amazing life and be able to make the world a bit better for others. So, people in the audio people, I'm getting ready. So before I close, I want to share with you a very short video which I think describes joyful leadership. And perhaps it describes it so well because it was filmed simultaneously, instantaneously, with no funding, and it's during one of our wild programs, where, as I said, disabled women who face indescribable hardships in their own countries, in a few minutes during this video, they transformed their discrimination that they faced into joyful power and solidarity. So please join me as we watch this video and turn down the lights. thank you. So I'm going to close now, and I wanted to end by letting you know that as was mentioned, I wrote a video called No Ordinary Days, a life of activism, globetrotting, and unexpected pleasures. And after I got the MacArthur Fellowship, I had an agent call me, and they said, oh, we'll definitely get you a publisher. So I wrote the book, and I was excited, and a few weeks later, she said, I think this is really going to be great. You're going to get, I've written the transcript now, you're going to get a publisher. And the day came, and I said, well, did I get anything? Zero. Nobody wanted to publish the book. And she says, I'm so sorry, Susan. I was so optimistic. I thought they'd really be excited about this. And I said, well, what was the reason? Why do you think nobody wanted to publish the book? And you know what their answer was? You're too happy. They said, no, your book is not believable. Nobody can be paralyzed at 18 and do all these things. You didn't tell the reader. I said, well, yeah, I was happy, but I was angry. I was angry at discrimination. And they said, no. Well, all somebody has to say is you can't do anything. So what did I do? I self-published the book. So thank you for letting me to talk about joyful leadership, where it's okay to be happy, it's okay to be joyful, and I hope some of you will take the opportunity to read it. It's a very, I think, fast-paced, moving. Some of my friends say it's very personal. It's a bit risque, but I think this audience can handle it. So I want to, as I say now, and I'm hoping that you'll have a lot of questions. I wanted to say that I think being joyful is really a very powerful way to lead. And I look forward to learning from each of you during these next few days, because I hope that something in my journey has touched you so that it will help you transform your journey, so that you, each of you, can perhaps trampoline to your greatest heights. And if you trampoline to your greatest heights, I think you will make the world better for others to do the same. So I hope that each of you will support other women sitting next to you, or women in your life, so that they can reach their dreams. I hope you will also take the time to laugh, celebrate, to get through those difficult obstacles when they happen, and to be grateful for the few precious years that all of us are given to live our lives. And I want to end with a poem that goes like this. If you go confidently in the direction of your dreams and endeavor to live the life you have imagined, you will meet with success unexpected in early hours. If you have built castles in the air, your work will not be lost, for that is where they should be. And now, I hope all of you will use these precious few days at this fabulous conference to take your dreams and to put the foundations under them. I wish each of you joy, and I wish each of you success in all that you do. And I thank you.
We're going to see if I can figure out this hand mic. But while we are, if you've got questions, please raise them up. Our volunteers are circulating through right now, and we'll send them up to the front. And while I'm waiting for some from the audience, let me start, Susan, with just, you seem like somebody, obviously, who no doesn't work well for. You find your way around it. But somewhere along the line, there has to be one of those obstacles you looked at and you just said, you know, this might be the one that slows me down. And what was your thought process in figuring out how to go over that one?
That's a good question. Yeah, well, I think that I I had, after being disabled, I faced some health issues as well, and needless to say, I was diagnosed with breast cancer about 9 years ago, and I thought, really? Like, really, God? I mean, really? Do I really need this? And and again, I'm sharing with that, and it's that threw me, because that's a whole different ball game, and I'm sure there are many of you here, I'm not going to ask you who you are, who either know somebody who's dealt with that or have other things. And I thought that's a challenge, and I tried to have to say, okay, well, I've got to get through it the same way that I've gotten through some of the other things. And as when I went through 35 treatments of radiation, and at the end I had a radiation emancipation party, and I had a party, and I had all the pastries, where I'll just tell you, all the pastries, and they were delicious. They were all shaped like boobs. And I have an adaptive bicycle. I bicycle to radiation. I have an adaptive bike where I put my wheelchair. And my oncologist said, I've had a lot of people take radiation. I have never had anyone bicycle to radiation. So again, it was the same type of thing. It was just, how do you take something that sometimes seems so overwhelming, and then, I think, how do you face it? And then, where possible, how do you find the joy and the celebration even when you get through that? So yeah, I think being joyful does not mean not being afraid. It does not mean not having fear. It does not mean not going through difficult times, and acknowledging that. And I think when that happens, and I'm sure all of you have had this in your life, what you have to do is you have to reach out to your friends and your family and get the support that you need. But again, sometimes we don't know. Sometimes the things that are terrible at the moment can turn around. And here I am today, and very grateful, happy to be alive.
That's great. So what would you recommend that those of us, I'm assuming those of us who are not disabled can do when we encounter a disabled person? And they said that they had a sense that people are often looking for a way, they get confused. They don't know how to reach out. They get uncomfortable. Okay. It's that big, now what do I do?
Right.
So tell us what to do. Okay.
Well, I'm going to answer that, I guess, in two ways. I mean, for me, it's like, you do whatever you would do for a non-disabled person. I'm not going to even sort of say, which is really, there is no difference. But what I do think people can do is, when I talked about infiltration, I think it's important for me, for non-disabled people, is to go and to reach out and get more disabled girls and more disabled women. I mean, if you look around here, I'm sure there are many people in this audience who have disabilities. Some may be non-apparent disabilities. But when I go around the world and speak, and I know as many women here, I'm in the International Women's Forum, I'm saying, where are all the other women with disabilities? They are not at the leadership conferences. They are not always running to be politicians. So I think one of the biggest things, I'm going to take it sort of to a more human rights political level for that question, if that's okay, is for people is to go out and find where these other women and girls with disabilities, and make sure to bring them in the fold of the women's movement so they get to be leaders. And I think, because really, I mean, people with disabilities are, just people who have disabilities. And so I think the thing is, for me, it's really it's a political issue, is how do disabled people get their rights, treat everybody the same, and let's get more disabled women to be part of the women's movement.
Great. Thank you. So here's a real basic one. Where does all that energy come from?
It's funny, because I'm sure some of you have been reading about Hillary Clinton, and supposedly when they said, how did you cope with all the difficulties after the election, her answer was Chardonnay. So I think my answer to that is chocolate. So I think I don't drink coffee. My staff won't let me drink coffee because I come into the office like this every single day. So I think for me, I do think it gets back to just really feeling like this is our time. You've all seen The Wizard of Oz, and the hourglass when she was stuck in the castle. This is our time in our lives, and I don't want to get dramatic to all of you, but none of us know how long we have in this life and how much time we have. And I really think that the secret of living a joyful life is to realize that, and to realize that every single day this is your day, and the things that happen, if you're still alive and healthy to talk about it, was not such a bad day. And so really, how do you take that energy and really feel like you're using every possible moment to the fullest? And I think that's where my energy comes from.
So now I'm going to do something that I've been known to do in past conferences, because when we have our first speaker up here, Susan, the audience is pretty shy. They're newbies, okay? Nobody wants to write a question down, but half of them have them. So when the questions aren't coming up to me, I go out to the questions.
Go ahead.
And so I come up to a table like this and I say, all right, just a comment. The day of your new journey, August 29th, 1971, began 1 year to the day before a dear friend was born. He is a different journey today. We celebrate his life on Saturday. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And I'm sure, that's the other thing that we find is that there's something very personal. There are a lot of connections that are made in something like this. And thank you for sharing that, because I know there are others out there. So now I'm coming over here. And I'm saying, someone at this table has a question. Come on. Come on. I'm getting, all right. But I don't go to there. Here we go. Here we go. All right. See, I'm feeling like Bob Barker here or something.
How did you overcome some of the obstacles that you may have run into other countries, since a lot of countries don't really focus on people that have disability, and they don't even have access for them in most of their buildings?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And, I was thinking just one part of what our organization does. Our organization is working with disabled people around the world. Right now we have a project funded by the State Department where we're working in Armenia, Peru, Guatemala, Kenya, and I think one other, maybe Guatemala. And what we're doing is we're working with disabled people and with the governments and with civil society, because most countries in the world have laws for disabled people, but the laws are not enforced. So we're trying to get trained disabled people on, do you know what your law is? And talk to the governments, and how do the governments have the law to get them implemented? Because if you look here in the United States, when people come to the United States and they say, oh my God, you've got these ramps and the university is accessible, do you all know how that happens? The United States government did not make that happen. Disabled people really organized and went to the streets to also first pass the 504 law, which was the predecessor to the ADA. So really we're trying to work with disabled people and governments, because it's a win-win for everyone when disabled people can be in the society, can go to the schools, can get jobs. And so that's some of the things that we're doing. But a lot of it is what I talked about here is, in order for you to get your rights, we say you have to have a rights-bearing attitude. You have to believe deep in your heart that you have a right to have those rights. And so we talk about getting disabled people and how do you have that attitude, but then how do you get the laws and how do you get those laws enforced? And I don't know if you know that, but I also, we teach a class at the University of Oregon, and who knows when it was the longest ever sit-in of a government building in the United States history? Does anyone know the answer to that? Okay, Professor, Dean, hello? Hello? All right.
I was guessing it was Wisconsin during the labor.
No, It was, and it was during the 504 demonstrations where disabled people were fighting for 504, which is the law before the ADA, and 100 people took over the Health, Education, and Welfare building in San Francisco. And how do I know this? Because I was a young student and I had to be there, and people thought they went into the building for one day and they thought no one would leave. It's okay, you've been in the building for one day, thank you, you should go. And the disabled people locked their chairs, they hang on to each other, and they said, we're not leaving. And they couldn't arrest us because the police wagons weren't accessible and neither were the jails. Right. Which has changed. They are accessible now. But so that's what happened, and the disabled people stayed in that building for 26 days, the longest takeover. There's videos on YouTube called The Power of 504. And one other little known fact, because people were donating food while we were in the building, it was the only time that both McDonald's and the Black Panthers probably worked together donating food. So.
Okay, you talked about getting a grant and writing a grant. How easy or difficult is it if someone's got a passion and they need to get that passion funded? How difficult is that, and what did you do?
Right. So that's a great question. So obviously, when I was first a student at Berkeley, and then writing a grant, the main thing is you have to first have a nonprofit. So you have to form a 501c3. Mostly to get grants, you have to have a nonprofit. Again, I think sometimes not knowing what you don't know is good. What we did actually when I started the nonprofit for BORP, I went to the men's, actually I was playing in it too, as a wheelchair basketball team, and they had already a nonprofit status. And we took all their words for their bylaws, and we just changed a few words in the bylaws from basketball to something else. You get a board of directors, and then I think it's really important to start small, to get a very small grant, and then once you get a small grant, and then you build. But again, there's probably lots of people in your communities who write grants and to do that. But I think, as probably many of the speakers will say in the next 2 days, take action, do it. Don't think, I can't do it, somebody else can do it better, I don't know what I'm doing. And surround yourself with people who know more than you do or know different things. Because I'm good at some things, but I have a fabulous staff who are much better and smarter than me in so many things, and that's how you move forward.
What advice do you have for people who are caregivers for people with memory issues? A little more personal.
Right, yeah, so that's, I think, caregiving is a very personal matter and a very personal choice. And what I was able to do with my mom, I was able to do, and I know other people can't do that for various reasons. I want to make sure that everyone should feel okay about what you need to do if you have to face that decision. For me, I think that, when my mom began having her Alzheimer's, I went, rather than trying to make her conform to our world and to try to memorize things, I went on her journey to her world. So rather than having, my mom, we would go someplace, and if she couldn't finish a sentence, I sort of helped her finish the sentence. And and then, and music and singing became very, very important. But I never corrected her. I never did anything. And I traveled with her, and I literally remember being, people said, oh, you shouldn't take your mom away, and we wanted to go to Hawaii, and we did. And I'd be pushing her wheelchair in the bathroom and helping her change her pants and doing everything just to keep her life going. And my mom was